While boycotting my wedding, my daughter-in-law posted on Facebook, "Watching someone make a fool of themselves at 68 is just sad." She had no idea the fool was worth $4.7 million. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad you're here to listen. Stay here with me through this whole story and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far my stories travel. She thought it was funny. A few dozen likes, some fire emojis, a string of laughing reactions from her Pilates group. Maybe she even read the comments aloud to my son, still in his bathrobe, sipping coffee I paid for in a kitchen I remodeled. Maybe they both had a chuckle. Or maybe she didn't show him at all. Maybe she just tapped hide from mom and hit post, thinking that was the end of it. You should know, when Eloise typed that little post, she didn't just insult me. She forfeited everything. The house she lives in, mine. The money they've been counting on since their engagement, gone. What she thought was a punchline was actually a detonator, because 3 weeks earlier, I'd rewritten every document, every clause, every assumption they'd built their life around. So if you want to know how a Facebook post turned into a full-blown financial excommunication, keep listening, because this isn't about revenge. It's about revelation. And they're not ready for either. It started 2 months earlier, on a Tuesday. The air smelled like rain, but didn't follow through. I was rearranging the dining room, again, trying to make space for the folding chairs. I'd offered to host Easter this year, figured it might help. Things had been tense since Christmas, and I thought a spring table with tulips and lemon cake might thaw things out. I was halfway through ironing the linen runner when my phone buzzed. A photo from Russell, no caption. Just an image of Owen on a playground swing, cheeks flushed, hair wild. His legs were a blur. I smiled instinctively until I realized what was behind him. Eloise's parents, not Russell, not Eloise, not me, just them, beaming. They were in town. I hadn't been told, hadn't been invited. The photo was a breadcrumb, just enough to suggest inclusion, not enough to warrant questions. I almost texted back, "Where are you?" But I didn't, because I already knew the answer. I was no longer the first call, I was the afterthought, the fallback sitter, the polite obligation they scheduled when her parents were busy or out of town, and lately they were never out of town. Still, I let it go. Told myself it was just timing. Told myself Easter would be different. It wasn't. 2 days later, they declined my invitation. "Busy weekend," Russell said. "Eloise's folks already made plans with us." It was the way he said already that stayed with me, like it was out of his hands, like I was the one overlapping someone else's territory, not his mother. Just a conflict on the calendar. I set down the linen runner, smoothed it out, then folded it and placed it back in the drawer. They'd made their plans. Now it was time for me to make mine. His name was Conrad, and he used to buy his coffee black with a splash of oat milk every Thursday morning at the corner cafe where I liked to read. Not flirt, not linger, just read. He'd nod at me like a man who'd made peace with his solitude. Not shy, just settled. There was a kind of politeness in him that made me feel calm, like we were both pretending not to notice we'd claimed the same table 2 weeks in a row. He didn't ask for my number. Not at first. He asked what I was reading. I told him it was a gardening memoir, but I hadn't touched the soil in months. He said he'd killed a basil plant just by looking at it too long. I laughed and it startled me. I hadn't laughed like that in ages. We started meeting there on purpose. We didn't say it, but we both arrived earlier each time, pretending we just happened to run into each other again. I learned he was a retired architect, widowed, a daughter in Portland, a dog named Booker, a fondness for croissants, even though he claimed to be gluten sensitive. He listened well. That was the part that got me. He didn't rush to fill silences. He'd ask about things and actually remember them. Little things, like how I like my tea steeped strong and how I still kept my late husband's fountain pen in the drawer, even though I hadn't used it in a decade. One morning, it rained hard. The cafe was packed. I offered him the other half of my table, and he sat down without hesitation. We didn't talk much, just watched the storm hit the glass like applause. That was the first day I let myself imagine something new. It wasn't romance. Not exactly. It was presence. It was having someone notice when you put on earrings, someone who said, "You look nice today," with no agenda, just because you did. It terrified me, not because I didn't want it, but because I did. And wanting at this age comes with weight, grief, doubt, calculation. Wanting means reopening a heart that's already been stitched closed more than once. It means hearing your own children whisper the word companion with tight smiles and louder judgment. Still, when he asked me to dinner, I said yes. I wore a blue blouse I hadn't touched in years and took an extra 5 minutes on my makeup. When I walked into the restaurant, he stood up, like I was someone to be seen. After that, it became a rhythm. Tuesday lunch, Thursday coffee, Sunday walks by the river. He never pushed, never made me explain what I wasn't ready to say. When I finally told him about Henry, my late husband, and how long I'd been alone, he just nodded, said, "You don't have to prove you're ready. Just let yourself enjoy what already is." We were in the conservatory at the Botanical Gardens when he first mentioned marriage. Not directly, not in a grand gesture. He was talking about his lease ending and how expensive assisted living apartments were getting, and how he hated the idea of paying rent at 70. He said it offhandedly, if we were married, we could consolidate so much. Not for the tax breaks, just for the peace of mind. I didn't answer right away, because peace of mind was exactly what I hadn't had since Henry died. And for the first time in years, I could almost picture it again. Sunday dinners without scripts, companionship without obligation, mornings that didn't begin in silence. When I told Russell, he blinked, just blinked, said nothing at first. Then, "So it's serious?" I said yes. He nodded like someone doing mental math. "And you're sure he's not just, lonely?" I wanted to laugh, as if loneliness were some kind of shameful disqualifier, as if I weren't lonely too. "I'm sure," I said. He didn't bring it up again until Eloise did. She didn't ask questions. She made a statement. "It's just odd, don't you think?" she said, swirling her wine. "I mean, people don't usually get married that late in life. It's a little, what's the word? Impulsive." I smiled. Tight. Controlled. "What's odd is assuming people lose the right to love once they pass a certain birthday." She sipped. "Of course. I didn't mean anything by it. But she did, and I felt it. The slow shift from condescension to hostility. The way her tone changed every time she said the word wedding, like it was a punchline, not a plan. She'd tell people I was starting a new chapter, but always with that look. The one people save for toddlers and tiaras or retirees who join dance troupes. Amused, indulgent, not respectful. Still, I moved forward. I didn't want a spectacle. I wanted a celebration. Something modest, joyful, a backyard wedding with string lights and lemon cake and a trio playing old jazz standards. I picked a simple cream dress. I asked Owen to carry a small bouquet down the aisle. I even offered to pay for Eloise's hair and makeup as a gesture. She never responded. 2 weeks later, I received a text from Russell. "We're going to sit this one out. Timing's not great." That was all it said. No call. No conversation. Just silence, dressed up as scheduling. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I turned off my phone, placed it in the drawer beside Henry's pen, and sat very still. It was beginning. I just didn't know how far it would go. The wedding was small, beautiful actually, intimate, 30 guests, mostly friends from the library board, and a few of Conrad's hiking group. We served lemon tartlets and Prosecco and stood under a canopy of paper lanterns while the neighbor's daughter played cello. When I walked down the garden steps with a single sunflower in my hand, every person in that backyard stood up, except the two people whose absence felt like a hole in the photograph. There was a chair with Russell's name on it, set beside a smaller one labeled Owen. Both stayed empty. My neighbor Grace leaned over and whispered, "Are they stuck in traffic?" I smiled. "No, just stuck." People were kind. They didn't ask questions after that. They just toasted us and danced and took photos beside the trellis. Conrad cried during the vows. I did too. It felt like stepping into something real again, not despite my age, but because of it. I wasn't trying to reclaim youth. I was claiming happiness fully, deliberately. I didn't check my phone until the next morning. I wish I hadn't. The first thing I saw was a notification from an old friend, someone I hadn't spoken to in years, tagging me in a comment. "This okay with you?" Confused, I clicked. It was a post from Eloise, a black and white photo of an empty wedding arch with the caption, "Watching someone make a fool of themselves at 68 is just sad." Below it, blocked from seeing this LOL, and a crying laughing emoji. 74 likes, a dozen comments, fire emojis, one brave badge. My face went hot, my hands cold. I stared at it for a full minute before closing the app. Then I opened it again, read it slower, read it like someone studying a confession. She hadn't just skipped my wedding, she had mocked it. Not privately, not in passing, publicly, with glee, and not just me. The entire idea of a woman my age believing she deserved love, deserved a wedding, deserved to feel visible. There was no mistaking it. She hadn't been neutral. She hadn't just sat it out. She'd performed her contempt like a punchline. And Russell? Nothing. No message, no apology, no text asking, "Did you see this?" Of course he saw it. He lived with her, shared a bed with her. They'd probably drafted it together. Or worse, he'd said nothing, said less than nothing, and let her do what she always did, turn cruelty into content. For a moment, I imagined calling him, just once, not to scream, not to demand, just to say, "You know who I am, you know what I've given." But even that felt too generous, because I no longer believed he did. That was the hardest part, not the post, not the public spectacle, not even the ageism or the shade disguised as sass. It was that my son didn't defend me. It was that he saw someone sneer at his mother and thought silence was safer. I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I used to help him sort his Halloween candy, the same one where I bandaged his knee the first time he fell off his bike. I looked out the window and tried to remember the last time he'd come over just to talk without needing something. I couldn't. The house was quiet, not hollow, just clarified. Everything loud had fallen away. What remained was the truth. They weren't just skipping my wedding, they were erasing me. And they weren't doing it with malice. Not exactly. That would have taken effort. No, they were doing it with ease, with comfort, like it was normal to discard a woman who no longer fit their narrative. I didn't cry. I got up, poured myself a glass of water, opened the back door, and stepped outside. The wind was soft. The garden still smelled like rose and citronella from the candles. The paper lanterns swayed gently in the breeze. The chairs were stacked. The trellis still stood. I picked up a single yellow petal from the grass and held it between my fingers. Then I went back inside, pulled out the folder labeled Estate, and opened it. I didn't text Russell. I didn't comment on the post or forward it or ask mutual friends if they'd seen it. I didn't call Eloise to demand an explanation. I didn't cry to Conrad. I didn't even screenshot it. I just stared at it for a while, then closed the app, then reopened it again, just to make sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing. It was still there. The arch, the caption, the laughing faces, the sharp little barbs dressed up like sass. I turned off my phone and left it face down on the hall table. Then I made tea. Cinnamon, Russell's favorite back when he was little and used to get night fevers. I used to bring it to him in a yellow mug with a paper napkin folded underneath so he wouldn't burn his hands. He was 6 the first time he said, "Thank you, Mom. I feel safe now." I sipped slowly. The house creaked in the wind. A branch tapped against the window like it had something to say but didn't know how to say it. The hurt didn't come in a wave. It came in a hush, a kind of mental quiet, like something had been turned off inside me and all that was left was the hum of what used to be. I didn't need a confrontation. What I needed was to stop hoping they'd behave differently. That was the shift. I spent the rest of the morning clearing off the desk in the guest room. It had become a clutter station. Old catalogs, expired coupons, a stack of birthday cards I hadn't opened from last year. I found a photo of Owen tucked in a drawer from when he was about 2. His cheeks were full and his smile was gummy, and I could still hear the squeal he used to make when I played peekaboo behind the couch. I didn't throw it away, I just placed it in a folder labeled Keep. Then I pulled out the blue binder, the one I hadn't touched in almost 8 years. Assets and instructions written in block letters across the front. I'd started it right after Henry died, but let it go dormant once Russell started handling things for me. I'd told myself I was passing the torch. I didn't realize I was handing over the matchbook. Inside were documents: the deed to the Lakeview condo I'd inherited from Aunt Ruth, the mineral rights to a parcel in Colorado I never bothered to sell, and bank account summaries from the municipal bond ladder Henry had set up before his second stroke. There were passwords written in pencil, names of old attorneys I'd meant to fire but never did. A trust agreement I'd signed in 2009 with Russell listed as successor trustee. I stared at that line for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and clicked on my estate attorney's name, Margaret Levy, retired. Below her name was a note that her firm had been taken over by a junior partner, a woman named Hannah Park. I clicked the link, filled out the contact form, and requested a consultation. Reason for inquiry: revision of estate plan, preferred method of contact, email only, urgency level, moderate. Notes: I'd like to keep this quiet. It took 5 minutes. Then I opened the ledger I used for holiday budgeting and wrote a single line on a fresh page. They've been counting on what I've built. They just forgot who built it. The next morning, I started making lists. Not revenge lists, just logistics: property titles, beneficiary designations, joint accounts, shared authorizations, any place where their names had been grandfathered in out of habit or guilt. I took stock of what I still owned in full and what I'd allowed to drift into ours without realizing that ours no longer included me. I pulled the deed for the townhouse on Ellery Street. I remembered the closing date clearly. Russell had come along, fresh out of college, said it was so cool that his mom owned rental properties. He'd called it an empire, said we should get coffee after. We never did. I found the rental agreement with the florist in Unit B. She paid in cash, never missed a month. I made a note to send her a holiday card. Then I opened the bank portal and changed the password on the trust account. New security questions, new contact info, no alerts sent. There were no slammed doors, no middle of the night breakdowns, no wine-soaked voice memos or angry replies drafted and deleted, just structure. I moved through my house like a woman staging it for a new listing, not because I planned to sell it, but because I wanted to see it clearly again, on my terms, without their footprints muddying up the picture. I gathered the spare keys Russell had never returned, the garage clicker Eloise once borrowed for a few days, the emergency contact forms that still listed their number. I placed them all in a manila envelope and wrote one word across the front in ink: outdated. That evening, Conrad made dinner. Nothing fancy: chicken, potatoes, a salad he forgot to dress. He didn't ask about the post. He didn't ask why I'd been quiet. He just poured me a glass of wine and said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. You seem clearer." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him. This man who wasn't Henry, who didn't try to be, who just sat with me, steady and unbothered, like he knew that silence wasn't something to fix. It was something to witness. I lifted the glass, tapped it gently against his. "To clarity," I said, and meant it. The next Monday, Hannah Park's assistant called to schedule a meeting. I asked if we could do it by phone. She said yes, and just like that, my estate went back into motion. It wasn't the first time I'd restructured things. After Henry passed, I'd spent weeks trying to understand where everything lived: certificates in the safe, stocks in paper form, insurance policies with outdated beneficiaries. I'd cleaned up most of it back then, but like a garden, it doesn't stay tidy. People creep back into your documents, your accounts, your assumptions, sometimes through kindness, sometimes through guilt, sometimes because they know you won't notice. Hannah was sharp, young, but thorough. She asked real questions, ones my son never had. "Do you currently have any joint ownership with your son?" "Yes." 2 properties and 1 LLC. Do you want to keep him on? No. Do you want to notify him right away or wait until the filings are complete? Wait, she nodded. Quietly? I smiled. Yes, that's the word I want. Then that's how we'll do it. I gathered everything: titles, tax forms, PDFs of bank statements. I sent them through a secure portal with labels like remove, update, redesignate. I reviewed the trust structure and changed the successor trustee from Russell to Hannah's office. I opened a new brokerage account under my married name and began transferring assets in kind, which she assured me was the cleanest path. Russell's name began to vanish, not maliciously, legally. I sat at the kitchen table, our table, and marked each document with a pink sticky note when it had been reviewed. Each time I peeled one off and placed it in the done pile, I felt the air in the house shift, lighter, less watched. Next came the passwords, the bank logins, the utilities, the places where my recovery email still forwarded to a shared account Russell once helped me set up. I changed every one of them. I created a new Gmail, a new phone number tied to estate matters. I bought a small fireproof safe and tucked the SIM card inside. I moved through my digital life like a locksmith. They had no idea the doors were changing. Elise, the notary Hannah recommended, came to the house on Thursday. She wore navy slacks and carried a clipboard, and she never once commented on the wedding photos on the mantle. I liked her instantly. We sat at the dining table while she reviewed the revised will. I initialed every change. Russell and Eloise, removed from inheritance and power of attorney. New allocations: 40% to charity, 20% to Owen via educational trust, 40% to Conrad. Home, retained in trust, beneficiary now marked as life partner, Conrad Lewis, contingent on surviving the testator. She paused at that line and looked up. Do you want to leave it as life partner or update it to spouse? Spouse, I said. I want no wiggle room. She nodded. Spouse it is. When she left, I sat there alone for a while, staring at the envelope she'd given me, the official one with the seal. I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt aligned, like I'd finally caught up with myself. That night, I opened the shared folder where Russell once uploaded family photos for me to help organize. I downloaded the ones that mattered: Owen in his Halloween costume, Russell at graduation, Henry in the bookstore with his reading glasses perched too low. Then I deleted the rest, not out of anger, just clarity. By Friday, I had a letter drafted for the Langley tenants. I'd reviewed the lease agreements, my signature on all of them. Russell's only listed on 2. I updated the contact forms and designated Hannah's office as the new point of correspondence. I printed the letters, hand-signed each one, and placed them in stamped envelopes. On Saturday, I drove to the Langley building myself. I hadn't walked those hallways in over a year. The floors were clean. The stairwell smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I knocked on Arturo's door. He ran the barber shop on the ground floor and handed him the envelope. Everything all right? He asked. Better than ever, I said. Just some internal restructuring. No changes to your lease. He smiled. Good to see you, Ms. Whitaker. You too, Arturo. Tell your wife I said hello. I walked the block afterward, bought myself a sandwich, watched the pigeons fight over a bread crust on the curb. I was invisible to the world, but newly visible to myself. Back at home, I went into the storage closet and pulled out the shoebox labeled joint. Inside were keys, garage, mailbox, storage unit, the extra clicker for the Ellery gate. I placed them one by one into a bag. Then I removed the label from the box, peeled it off slowly, threw it away. I didn't send a letter to Russell, didn't make a call, didn't say, you've been removed. He didn't deserve that kind of closure. What he would get instead was silence. He'd notice soon enough, when the login stopped working, when the bank called and said his access had been revoked, when the tenants began sending checks elsewhere, when the Christmas check from Mom never came. He'd check the account and see it empty. Not because I'd drained it, but because I'd moved it. He'd try to call. Maybe he already had. I hadn't checked. My phone was still face down on the hall table, silent. On Sunday, Conrad brought me a bouquet of orange tulips. "Didn't know if you were a tulip person," he said, handing them over sheepishly. I looked at them for a moment, then smiled. I am now. It's easy to blame Eloise, and Lord knows she's earned her share of it. Sharp-tongued, image-obsessed, always calculating what looks right instead of what feels right. But if I'm being honest, she didn't break Russell. She just gave him permission to stay broken. The boy I raised used to be so certain of himself, not loud, just earnest. He cried when he thought his third-grade teacher didn't like him. He gave up his seat on the bus without anyone telling him to. He once stood outside the bookstore with a cardboard sign that said, "Read more," and handed out flyers he'd made on my printer, one shaky clip art book at a time. He used to dream big, not about money, about meaning. He wanted to be a teacher, then a writer, then maybe both. I still have a short story he wrote in middle school about a dragon who taught history and gave extra credit for kindness. It was silly. It was beautiful. I don't know when he started shrinking. Maybe it was after Henry died when everything felt heavier and I leaned on him too much. Maybe it was the first job rejection or the fifth. Maybe it was the first time Eloise told him he needed to think bigger and he heard that as, "You're not enough." I watched him change in increments. The first Thanksgiving they hosted, he asked if I could wear something neutral so I wouldn't clash with the decor. The first time Owen stayed overnight, he texted a full list of parenting do's and don'ts, including a note about not overdoing it with sugar or nostalgia. The year I offered to help with the down payment on their house, he said thank you, like someone embarrassed by the sound of his own name. He promised to pay it back. He never did. He used to bring me little things, pastries, books he thought I'd like, photos of Owen with handwritten captions on the back. Then the gifts stopped, then the visits, then the phone calls. But it wasn't the absence that broke me. It was watching him become a man who measured worth by silence. A man who let his wife talk over me, correct me, dismiss me in front of others, and said nothing. A man who smiled politely while I was being erased in real time, then hugged me afterward and called it love. I don't think he even realized what he was doing. That's the tragedy of it. He thought compliance was kindness. He thought staying neutral made him good. But neutrality in the face of cruelty is just cowardice in nicer shoes. It was easier for him to let Eloise draw the lines. She had the sharper pen. She always did. And he learned to stay in the frame she made for him, as long as it kept the peace, as long as it kept the house quiet, as long as it kept him from having to choose. He never raised his voice, not once, but he let hers carry everything. When I looked at that Facebook post, the one with the arch and the caption that gutted me, I didn't just see Eloise's name. I saw the man who didn't ask her to take it down. I saw the boy I raised, now standing in the background of his own life, watching someone else burn bridges on his behalf and telling himself he was still a good son. He isn't cruel. That would be easier. He's something worse. He's weak. And I say that not with hate, but with grief, because it means he can't protect Owen either, because it means he'll always choose the quieter room even when the noise is wrong, because it means he'll say nothing when Eloise turns her sharpness on someone else, until that someone is old enough to leave. I don't think he meant to hurt me. I think he meant to avoid hurting anyone and didn't realize until too late that doing nothing is still a choice. That love without courage is just a shadow pretending to be shelter. And I'm done standing in shadows. A week after I signed the initial documents with Hannah's team, I called her back and asked for one more meeting, in person this time. She offered me a Monday morning slot. I wore my navy blazer, brought a folder labeled corrections, and walked into that office like a woman on her second life. This time, I didn't hesitate. "I want to update the will again," I said, this time with zero ambiguity. She raised an eyebrow. "You mean, I mean no loopholes, no partial assets, no slow transfers. I want it clear, enforceable, and irreversible." She nodded and flipped to a fresh legal pad. "Tell me everything." I told her about the Colorado parcel, the one I hadn't listed in the first meeting because I forgot it existed until I saw the annual tax notice in a stack of unopened mail. I told her about the silent partnership in the downtown real estate fund, about the municipal bonds in Henry's name that matured 5 years ago and rolled into a separate trust, about the jewelry I inherited from my mother, the one Eloise had once called charming costume pieces. I told her I wanted the estate split 4 ways. The first quarter to a literacy foundation Henry and I used to donate to. The second to a community center on the south side that helps older women re-enter the workforce. The third to Owen, locked into an educational fund he couldn't touch until age 25, and even then only for school or housing. The last quarter to Conrad, with no conditions. "And your son?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "Not a cent, and I don't want them to be able to challenge it on the grounds of mental fitness or undue influence." "Then I'll have you evaluated," she said. "Just a brief legal assessment, pro forma." I smiled. "That's fine, but make sure the psychologist knows I'll be the one asking them questions too." She laughed softly and kept writing. After the meeting, I took myself to lunch. Sat at a cafe Conrad and I had always meant to try, but never did. I ordered a croque monsieur, read a book of poetry, and sipped sparkling water with lemon. I felt light, not angry, not sad, just accurate. Conrad joined me there an hour later. He had tulip bulbs in a paper bag, yellow, orange, and deep crimson. He said, "I thought we could plant them by the fence this weekend. That corner needs some color." We walked home together, slowly, like people with nowhere urgent to be. When we reached the front gate, I said, "I've been changing things." He nodded. "I know." "Do you want to know what?" "I trust you." I took his hand. "But I want you to know, not just legally, personally." So we sat on the porch, and I told him everything about the updated will, the removal of Russell, the foundation contributions, the trust for Owen, the reallocation of assets I once assumed would pass quietly to my son and his wife, by default, by inertia, by lack of imagination. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he said only this: "You did the right thing, not just for you, for him too. People learn from consequences, not allowances." We sat in silence for a while. Then he added, "He'll call, eventually, or show up." "I know." "What will you say?" "Nothing," I said. "I've said everything I needed to say with signatures." Conrad reached into the paper bag and pulled out one of the tulip bulbs, held it in his palm like something delicate. "Did I tell you my daughter used to think these were onions?" I smiled. "Maybe they are, just hopeful ones." That night, I went back into the guest room and pulled out the envelope Elise had left. Inside was a notarized copy of the current estate plan. I added 2 handwritten notes and slipped them into the back pocket. First, a letter to Owen for when he turns 25. Second, a letter to myself, dated the day I met Conrad. Just a few lines, a thank you. Then I opened my laptop and started drafting something for Hannah, a cover memo to accompany the updated documents. I titled the file Final Instructions, Revision 2. At the top, I wrote, "This is not retaliation, it is correction. I am not erasing anyone. I'm just removing those who walked out on their own." I printed it, placed it with the rest. I went to bed with the windows open and no music on, no noise, no alerts, just the clean sound of my life realigning around its true center. Not rage, not revenge, just readiness. The first ripple came from the storage unit. Russell called the facility for an access code reset, said he'd misplaced the old one. The clerk pulled up the account and told him politely that it had been updated, that all requests now had to go through an authorized contact listed on the file, Elise Chambers, attorney of record. He said there must be some mistake. They said no, it was just policy. The second ripple was the utility bill. He tried to log in and pay it online, something I used to ask him to do years ago when the account system still confused me. The password didn't work. The security answers didn't match. When he clicked Forgot PIN, the reset link didn't arrive in his inbox. He emailed me a short note. Hey, Mom, can you send me the Duke Energy login again? I think I mistyped something. I didn't reply. A few days later, the real wave hit. The bank. He'd gone in to update his address on an old joint account we opened when he was 23 and thinking about buying his first car. I'd kept it open all these years, mostly out of sentiment. It had grown over time, accumulating dividends and interest. I never touched it. Until now. When he gave his name to the teller, she pulled up the profile, then frowned. Actually, sir, I'm afraid your access has been removed. He didn't understand. I'm on the account, she double-checked. You were, but this file has been amended. Sole owner now listed as Eleanor Whitaker. All access privileges revoked as of March 8th. He must have called me right after. I saw the missed call, then another, then a voicemail. Hey, Mom, not sure what's going on, but I just tried to access the old account and it looks like I'm locked out. Did you change something? He didn't sound angry. He sounded off balance, like someone who spent too long walking on a moving walkway and suddenly finds themselves on still ground. I didn't answer. The next day, an email came through. Hi, Mom. I've been noticing a few weird things. Not sure if it's just tech glitches or if you've been making some changes, but I'd love to chat. I'm not upset, just confused. Love you. He always writes, love you at the end, even when he's unsure if he means it. I closed the message and filed it in a folder labeled, Let Them Feel It, because that's what this was now. Not punishment, just weight. The weight of not being the center of someone else's gravity anymore. I spent the afternoon reorganizing my pantry. Took everything out, wiped the shelves, refilled the jars, dried lentils, arborio rice, tea bags sorted by flavor. When I was done, I sat on the floor, back against the cabinet, knees tucked in. Let the silence thicken. They weren't in control anymore. They just hadn't realized it yet. He showed up on a Thursday. I was clipping dead blooms off the hydrangeas when I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I didn't look up right away. I already knew it was him. There's a tension that lives in the air before someone asks for something they know they shouldn't. He got out of the car slowly, didn't slam the door, didn't walk with purpose, just hovered for a moment before heading toward the porch. Can we talk? He asked. I didn't answer, just stood and wiped my hands on a towel. Then I said, we can talk on the porch. He hesitated. I saw his eyes flick past me, toward the house, the window, the old lamp in the living room, the chair where he used to sit after school and eat peanut butter crackers while I went through the mail, but I didn't invite him in. We sat across from each other, 2 chairs, an old iron table between us, the space between our knees too wide for comfort. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Finally, I don't understand what's going on. I tilted my head slightly, said nothing. He pressed on. I mean, first the bank stuff, then the storage unit, now the LLC. I got a letter from Hannah's office. I'm being removed from everything. He looked at me like this was a betrayal, like I'd burned down a house he forgot I'd built. I just want to know why, he said. Why now? I folded the towel in my lap. Because now is when I stopped pretending. He blinked. Pretending what? That you still treated me like a person, that you still saw me as something other than a monthly risk report and an inheritance estimate. That's not fair. Isn't it? He ran a hand through his hair. I didn't know Eloise posted that. I let that sit for a beat. You didn't stop her either, I said. You didn't defend me. You didn't call. You didn't say, this is too far. You just let her do what she always does. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looked away. She's not a bad person, he muttered. No, she's just someone who sees older women as accessories or obstacles, and you let her set the tone. That's not true. It is, I said, calm, clear. You don't hit me, Russell. You don't curse. You send Christmas cards. But you've been quietly unloving for years. Every visit came with a time limit. Every conversation was rerouted through Eloise's filter. Every memory I offered was either corrected, mocked, or dismissed. He looked stricken. I never meant to hurt you. I nodded. But you did anyway. I didn't think you'd actually go through with this. You've always forgiven me." "I did," I said, "until I realized forgiving you was just another way of disappearing." He swallowed hard. "I thought we had an understanding about the business, about the future." "We did, and then I understood better." He exhaled sharply. "This doesn't feel like you?" I smiled, but not kindly. "That's because you only remember the version of me who stayed quiet, the one who made allowances, who bit her tongue at every dinner, smiled at every condescension, and paid for every mortgage hiccup without comment. You're angry." "No," I said, "I'm done." He looked at me like he didn't recognize the woman in front of him, and maybe he didn't. Maybe he only knew the mother who apologized when she was interrupted, the one who brought fruit platters to holidays she wasn't invited to, the one who funded their security deposits and stayed quiet when her name wasn't on the thank you list. He stood. "What am I supposed to tell Owen?" I looked up at him. "Tell him I love him, always, and that he can call me anytime he wants. My door is still open to him." "And me?" I stood too. "You closed it." He nodded slowly. "You really won't reconsider?" "I already reconsidered. That's what this is." He put his hands in his pockets, looked down at the steps. "I didn't think it would go this far." "That's the problem," I said. "You thought this was still your story." He looked up. "It's not," I said gently. "It's mine." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. This time he didn't try for a hug, didn't ask to come inside. He just walked down the steps and back to the car. I didn't watch him drive away. I went back to the hydrangeas, clipped what was dead, left what was still growing. A few weeks later, I walked into the community center off Halstead Avenue. I'd passed it hundreds of times before, on the way to the grocery store, the dentist, the library. I always meant to stop in. I never did, until now. The front door stuck a little, and the bell overhead gave a half-hearted jingle. The room smelled like old carpet and strong coffee. Behind a folding table covered in mismatched pamphlets sat a tall woman with silver braids and readers halfway down her nose. "You here to donate or volunteer?" she asked without looking up. I blinked. "Both?" She nodded once. "Good, start over there." That's how it began. No big speech, no deep confessional. Just a clipboard, a box of manila folders, and 2 hours spent sorting outdated tax forms from active ones. It was the most peaceful afternoon I'd had in months. The woman's name was Sharon. She ran the place like a general with a heart, sharp eyes, no fluff, and a quiet way of asking about your life without making you spill it all at once. She didn't ask why I was there. She asked if I could come back Thursday. I said yes. By the third week, I had a drawer with my name on it. I started helping with intake sessions for older women looking to re-enter the workforce. I didn't give advice. I just listened, took notes, helped fill out forms, gave them folders and tea and space to breathe. One woman, June, hadn't worked in 20 years. Her hands shook every time she signed something. I told her mine used to do that too. She said, "I didn't think I had anything left to offer." I said, "That's exactly what makes you dangerous." She laughed. We filed her resume that afternoon. I didn't talk about Russell or Eloise or the wedding. I talked about rebuilding, about budgets, about dignity. I brought in my old business templates from the bookstore and helped a few women start their own spreadsheets. I showed them how to read a lease, how to call their bank without apologizing for taking up time. I wasn't a guru. I wasn't a saint. I was just someone who had finally stopped giving her best years to people who flinched at her joy. Sharon asked if I would speak at the fundraiser next month. "About what?" I asked. "About what it means to come back to yourself," she said. "What it looks like when you stop auditioning for love." I said I'd think about it. Then I went home, pulled out my notebook, and wrote the opening line that same night. "You are not a backup plan. You are the main character." The fundraiser was held in a borrowed church basement with folding chairs and a table of Costco pastries. I wore a cream blazer I hadn't touched since my wedding. Conrad walked me in, kissed my cheek, and sat in the back row like a quiet lighthouse. I told my story, not the names, not the petty details, just the shape of it, what it feels like to shrink yourself to keep the peace, what it costs to stay silent, how the first thing you lose is your voice, and the last thing you get back is your time. I ended with this. Sometimes healing doesn't look like forgiveness. Sometimes it looks like a notarized letter and a new set of keys. They clapped, not loudly, but long. Afterward, June hugged me. Sharon handed me a lemon bar and a napkin. One of the new volunteers asked if I would start a budgeting class next month. I said yes, because for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't waiting to be invited in. I was already here. And I'd brought a chair. The envelope came on a Wednesday. No return address. Just pale blue paper, slightly creased, with my name written in careful, slanted script. Not a bill, not junk, not a card. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph, Owen, standing in front of a science fair display. The backdrop was a trifold poster board with crayon-colored planets, some slightly smudged. He stood proudly beside it, grinning, one sock slipping down, shirt half untucked, a constellation sticker stuck to his cheek. The kind of grin that said, "Look what I made." He looked older, taller, but his eyes were still the same. Wide, curious, still full of that bright, unfiltered joy I hadn't seen in person for almost a year. Behind him, in the corner of the display board, was a sentence scribbled in blue marker. My Nana taught me about Saturn. My throat caught. On the back of the photo, written in Eloise's unmistakable looping handwriting, were just 7 words. He asked if we could send this to Nana. No, dear Eleanor. No explanation, no apology, just the photo, just the line. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I needed more, but because I didn't. It was enough. Not a grand gesture, not a fix. Just a thread, a tether across the silence. Proof that I hadn't been erased entirely. That somewhere in Owen's world, I still existed. I remembered that night clearly. The one when he couldn't fall asleep. So we pulled a blanket onto the porch and watched the sky for hours. I told him about Saturn's rings and Jupiter's moons, about how stars were born and why some exploded. He asked if there was a planet made of ice cream. I said maybe, but we'd have to build a telescope just to find it. He fell asleep on my shoulder before we even made it to Mars. I didn't cry. I didn't call. I didn't send anything back. I just clipped the photo to the corkboard above my desk, right next to the community center calendar and a flyer for the spring workshop on financial literacy. Above it, a note from Sharon in black Sharpie. Thanks for showing up. I added a new note below it. In my handwriting this time, he remembers. That evening, I pulled down my green journal, the one Conrad gave me after the fundraiser, the one with the gold embossed cover that reads, "You don't owe them your silence." I opened to a blank page and wrote, "Today, someone remembered me without being reminded. Today, I saw proof that the love I gave out into the world didn't disappear, even when the people around it tried to rewrite the ending. It's still there. Still alive, still orbiting. That's enough." I put the pen down and made myself a cup of tea. Conrad was out walking Booker. The house was quiet, but not the lonely kind. Just soft. Still. I stood in the kitchen and looked out the window at the small patch of daffodils starting to bloom beside the fence. The ones we'd planted last fall, laughing about which bulbs we forgot to label. There was no dramatic music, no phone call, no miracle reconciliation, just a boy who remembered his Nana, and for tonight, that was more than enough. The anniversary of the wedding came and went without a ripple. No reminders popped up, no calls, no cards. I didn't check their profiles, didn't peek at photos, didn't wonder what they were doing or whether they were still whispering about me behind dinner party napkins. I had laundry to fold, a workshop to prep. Conrad's dog had eaten part of a gardening glove, and we spent the afternoon at the vet. Life kept moving, and I let it. I didn't mark the date on a calendar. I didn't light a candle or stare out the window hoping for anything. The ache had long since quieted into something else. Not bitterness, not grief, just stillness. Peace, I suppose, the kind that doesn't need to be posted or liked or explained. I spent that morning baking lemon scones. Sharon had mentioned the volunteers could use a treat. The new girl, Addie, just out of a bad marriage, asked if I could help her open a checking account without her ex finding out. I walked her through it. We printed forms. I bought her tea. Afterward, I walked home slowly, past the florist's window where orange tulips lined the glass in perfect rows. The same shade Eloise said clashed with everything. I smiled. At home, I opened my green journal to the last page, the one I'd been saving without knowing why, the one that sat blank for weeks while life rearranged itself around me. I uncapped the pen and wrote, I was never the one who disappeared. I was the one they stopped looking at, but I never left. I waited, I grieved, and I learned. And then finally, I turned the lock. I signed my name, dated it, and closed the cover. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like an arrival. The woman who sat here now didn't need anyone's permission to be happy. She didn't chase reconciliation. She didn't carry receipts. She didn't hold out hope that people would wake up and become better. She just built a better room and filled it with the kind of light that never dims when someone else walks out. Now I'm curious about you. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever gone through something like this? Let me know in the comments. And while you're here, I've left 2 of my other stories on screen. I promise they'll surprise you. Thanks for watching all the way to the end.